There's a tiny home shape hiding in plain sight on thousands of properties right now, and almost nobody notices it. It is the U shape, 3 walls wrapped around empty space, doing absolutely nothing for the person who built it. But close to that fourth side, just one more wall, and that same U shape stops being a floor plan and becomes something else entirely. A private courtyard, a hidden atrium, a tiny home that looks ordinary from the street and feels like a resort the moment you step through the front door. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how that transformation works, what it costs in 2026, and why builders who figure this out are getting wait lists instead of vacancies. Before we get into the build, hit subscribe and tap that notification bell. I break down one alternative housing design like this every single week, real numbers, real code requirements, no fluff. If you're even thinking about building small, you want these videos in your feed. Now let's get into it. So here's the thing about U-shaped tiny homes. They're already popular. You have probably seen them without clocking the pattern. 2 wings extending off a central living area like a squared-off horseshoe. People love them because they naturally separate a bedroom wing from a living wing, and the notch in the middle creates a sheltered outdoor space, usually a small patio or a breezeway. But most U-shaped tiny homes stop there. They treat that open notch as leftover space, a place to put a grill, maybe a couple of chairs. And that is the missed opportunity, because that open notch is one wall away from becoming the single most valuable square footage in the entire home. Close it off, and you have created a courtyard home, a design that architects have used for thousands of years, from Roman domus houses to Spanish hacienda compounds to modern Japanese courtyard homes, because it solves problems that a simple rectangle never can. Stick around, because later in this video, I am going to show you the exact wall placement and roofline trick that lets you make this conversion without touching your existing foundation, and it is cheaper than most people assume. Let's talk about what actually changes when a U becomes an O. In a U-shaped home, your courtyard is open on one side. That means it borrows light and air from the surrounding property, but it also borrows noise, wind, neighbors' sight lines, and weather. If you're on a windy site or a lot with close neighbors, that open notch can feel more exposed and private. When you close that fourth wall, even partially with a gate, a trellis, or a full wall section, you create what architects call a fully enclosed courtyard. The physics of that space change immediately. Wind that used to funnel straight through now swirls and settles. Sound from the street drops dramatically because you have got structure on all 4 sides absorbing and deflecting it instead of one open gap letting it straight in. And privacy goes from partial to total because there is no longer a sight line into your outdoor space from any angle at ground level. This matters more in 2026 than it used to because lot sizes for accessory dwelling units and tiny home placements keep shrinking in a lot of jurisdictions, and outdoor privacy is becoming the scarcest resource in small home design. A courtyard that is fully enclosed gives you that privacy without needing a large lot at all. Here is something most videos on courtyard homes miss. Courtyard design usually gets talked about for larger houses, 5-bedroom haciendas, big compounds. But it might actually make more sense for a tiny home than for a big one. Think about what a tiny home struggles with most. Limited square footage means every room tends to feel like it is doing double or triple duty. Natural light often only comes from 2 or 3 exterior walls because the floor plan is compact. And there is rarely a private outdoor space that feels like part of the house rather than just the yard around it. An O-shaped tiny home solves all 3 at once. The courtyard becomes an outdoor room that extends your living space without adding a single square foot of taxable, code-regulated interior floor area in most jurisdictions, since open-air courtyards are typically not counted toward enclosed habitable square footage under the International Residential Code definitions used in most 2026 building departments. That is a huge deal if you're trying to stay under an ADU size cap. You get the feeling of a much bigger home without tripping the limit that keeps your permits simple and your taxes low. Second, because every room in the O now faces inward toward the courtyard as well as outward toward the property, you get light and airflow from 2 directions instead of 1. That is the single biggest complaint people have about small homes, that back rooms feel like caves. The courtyard configuration eliminates that complaint by design. And third, obviously, you get that fully private outdoor room we already talked about. Now let's get into how you actually do this, because this is where most people either get it right and save thousands, or get it wrong and end up gutting their existing structure. If you already have a U-shaped tiny home, or you're designing one with conversion in mind, the trick is this. You do not need a full structural wall to close the fourth side. You need a connecting element that reads as enclosure without requiring the same foundation and header work as your primary walls. The three most common ways builders are closing that fourth side in 2026 are a light timber frame wall section with a single door or gate, a slatted privacy screen wall using cedar or thermally modified wood, and a glazed connector, essentially a slim glass and steel bridge that visually and physically closes the loop while still letting a huge amount of light through. Each of these ties into your existing wing foundations at the two open ends rather than requiring a full new foundation run across the gap. That is the entire secret. You are not building a fourth wing of the house. You are building a lightweight closure between two wings that already exist. Structurally, that is usually a beam-supported panel resting on isolated pier footings or ground screws, not a full continuous stem wall or slab foundation, which keeps both material cost and permitting complexity dramatically lower than people expect. One more detail worth knowing before you build. Because each wing keeps its own independent roofline instead of tying into a shared structure, rain runoff sheds outward away from the property on each side rather than pooling in the central courtyard. That is a small thing on paper, but it is the difference between a courtyard that stays dry and usable and one that turns into a drainage headache every time it rains. If you're finding this useful, do me a favor and drop a comment telling me whether you would want a full glass connector or a solid wall for your closure. I read every comment, and it genuinely shapes which designs I cover next. Now let's talk about what this actually costs in 2026, because the number surprised even me when I ran it. Let's talk real numbers, because vague statements about affordability do not help anybody planning an actual build. For a slatted wood privacy screen closure, roughly 8 to 12 feet wide, you are typically looking at somewhere between $2,200 to $4,800 installed in most regions of the country as of 2026, depending on what species and hardware. Thermally modified ash and premium exterior grade cedar run around $12 to $22 per linear foot on their own, and once you factor in post anchors, hardware, and 1 to 2 days of skilled labor, that range holds up whether you go with cedar on the higher end or pressure-treated pine on the lower end. For a light-framed solid wall section with a door, expect closer to $5,500 to $9,500 because now you are adding wall sheathing, insulation if it is conditioned, siding to match the rest of the home, and a functional door assembly with weatherproofing. For the glass and steel connector option, which gives you the most dramatic visual result and the most light transmission, budgets typically run from $14,000 to $25,000 depending on glazing type and whether the connector is a fixed panel or an operable sliding system. Most of these use dual-pane tempered low-E glass set into aluminum or steel framing. And if you are building in a colder climate, ask your supplier specifically about a thermal break frame, since that single upgrade is what keeps a glass connector comfortable through winter instead of just decorative. Compare any of those numbers to what it would cost to build an entirely new fourth wing with full foundation, framing, roofing, and finishes. Custom residential additions in 2026 typically run $250 to $450 or more per square foot once you include footings, roof ties, electrical, and a proper thermal envelope, which means even a modest 200 square foot wing realistically lands somewhere between $50,000 and $85,000 or more. You can see why the courtyard closure is the smarter move. You are getting the architectural and lifestyle benefit of a fully enclosed courtyard home for a fraction of the cost of actually adding square footage. Now, because I never want to give you a rosy picture without the fine print, here's what you need to check before you commit to this conversion. Courtyard enclosures that remain open to the sky, meaning no roof over the courtyard itself, are generally treated as exterior improvements rather than habitable additions under most 2026 municipal codes, which usually means a simpler permitting path often a standard building permit rather than a full plan review. Though this varies significantly by jurisdiction, and you should always confirm with your local building department before assuming anything. Where it gets more complex is if you decide to add any roof, even a partial pergola-style roof, over the courtyard. Depending on your jurisdiction, adding a roof structure over more than a defined percentage of the courtyard footprint can trigger it being counted toward your lot coverage calculations, and in some cases toward your floor area ratio, if the roof is substantial enough to be considered a structure rather than a shade element. If you are working within a size-capped ADU program, that distinction between an open courtyard and a roof courtyard can be the difference between staying under your size limit and blowing past it. Also check your local fire separation distance requirements if your closure wall sits close to a property line. Under IRC section R302.1, exterior walls is sitting roughly 3 to 5 feet from a property line generally require a 1-hour fire resistance rating and restrict or eliminate unrated openings and windows on that wall. Courtyard walls facing a shared lot line can trigger exactly this requirement depending on your setback. So confirm the distance before you finalize your closure design. None of this should scare you off the design. It just means this is a conversation you have with your local building department before you order materials, not after. Now here is the part one promised you at the beginning, the actual trick that makes this conversion work without touching your foundation, because I know some of you have been waiting for it. The move is this. Instead of framing your closure wall to bear any roof load, you let your two existing wings continue carrying their own roof lines exactly as they already do, completely independently. Your closure element is non-load bearing. It exists purely as an enclosure and a design statement, tied laterally into the two wing walls with simple bracket connections, not structurally integrated into the roof system at all. This is the detail that keeps cost low and permitting simple, because a non-load bearing partition wall is treated completely differently by most building departments than structural addition. You are not changing your roof structure. You are not adding a new foundation run. You are inserting what is essentially a very sophisticated fence between two existing walls. And that single distinction is what makes the entire O-shape conversion achievable on a weekend project budget rather than a full renovation budget. That is the piece almost nobody explains when they show you these dreamy courtyard tiny home photos online. It looks like a total architectural overhaul. Structurally, it is closer to adding a really nice gate. A few finishing touches separate a courtyard that feels like an afterthought from one that feels like it was always the plan. Match your closure wall's material language to your existing exterior, even if the construction method is completely different underneath. If your wings are clad in board and batten siding, echo that rhythm in your closure, even if it is a slatted screen rather than solid siding. Run the same flooring material from your interior straight out into the courtyard where possible. A polished concrete floor that continues from your kitchen out into the courtyard erases the visual line between inside and outside, which is the entire point of this design. And think about a single specimen tree or a small water feature as the courtyard's visual anchor. In a fully enclosed courtyard, every window in the home now looks at the same central point, so whatever you put there becomes the visual signature of the entire house. So that is the full path from U to O. You start with a shape most people already have or are already planning. You add one lightweight, non-load-bearing element that does not touch your existing foundation or roof system, and you end up with a fully private courtyard home that behaves like a much larger property than it actually is, all for a fraction of the cost of a real addition. If this changed how you're thinking about your own floor plan, subscribe now, because next week I am breaking down a design that takes this courtyard concept even further with a rooftop deck that solves the fire code and coverage issues we just talked about. You do not want to miss that one. Hit that bell, drop your thoughts in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.